Thanks for tuning in to more NASCAR coverage on Prime Sports NASCAR as we are ready to take a trip to Dover. That's right. The Monster Mile concrete. What is it? What is this? A 1 mile and what, CJ?
I think it's just 1 mile.
1 mile. There you go. I was looking at Eric's track trends, and I noticed, of course, New Hampshire and Phoenix are the other 1 mile tracks. And then he thought, though, that because, I guess, of the concrete, I don't know if it was also of the banking, but that Bristol is the most comparable to Dover. So
100% agree.
You do? Okay. So I went statistically, and I figured, like I always do, okay, now I want to know which track is the most comparable, so we can go in and see how drivers do at the other track, and that could help us out with handicapping these races. But when you look at it, okay, there are a couple of guys, Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, but Keselowski and Logano have 5 wins total between the two of them at Bristol. And Blaney is pretty good at Bristol, but none of them are good at Dover. And I saw a few others that were kind of like that. I was like, well, so why do you think that is? Why do you think that even though it might be the most similar, that doesn't necessarily mean drivers are good at Bristol, they're going to be good at Dover, and vice versa?
Dover, to me, is a little bit unique. It's kind of stand alone. It is a concrete surface. It has the banking. It races very quick like Bristol does. And to me, you need to get into a rhythm at that track. So in that way, they are similar. Now, in terms of getting into the corners, obviously, you're going to be building up a lot more speed. Dover's longer than Bristol. Bristol won't have the same corner entry speed that you do at Dover. However, the same kinds of trends seem to play out at the tracks in terms of, somebody crashes, it's very easy to be caught up in that crash. So we've seen the big one at Dover, just as we've seen it at Daytona, Talladega, just as we've seen it at Bristol. Now, I think with any kind of rhythm track, and we saw that last week, I would say too, at Darlington, you're going to get guys that get it and understand it and are able to set up their car and get into that kind of mode. But if you don't get it, if you're struggling with setup and it's just a track that vexes you, I think it's one of those ones like Darlington or Bristol even, that if you don't get it, if you're not comfortable, you're just not going to be fast.
All right. Last week, good that you weren't on the show on Monday, because who wants to recap the race from Darlington? That was a disaster. Martin Truex dominating the field. So, is that your driver on your fantasy team?
He is, yeah.
So you were happy about that because you had both Truex and Larson on your fantasy team. Yeah. That bodes well for you this week as well. As Martin and looked like Larson was going to make something of it, but he didn't. And Truex won easy. So, well, look, I'm sure there's a lot of people who think we're going to get a similar outcome this week, not just the top 2 drivers, but also the boredom of the race. There's 2 drivers that we've all agreed on this week. One of them is from the top 2, which you know who that is because you did not take Martin Truex Jr. So we all agreed on Kyle Larson. And the other is Kevin Harvick. So 2 drivers, and none of us went past. You were the surprise, because you are not Mr. Sleeper or Longshot. You are you're the only one who took a driver 20-1 or higher, which was Bowman. And I guess that's not a surprise because it's like, with how hard the track is on these cars, you just get the feeling that not only will it be a top team and a top car that can handle the track, but after what happened last week, I don't know, it's starting to feel like maybe it's going to be a long shot. It's going to be a big surprise.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just as I said when I was describing the differences in the track, it's very much a rhythm track. It's very much being able to be comfortable and confident when you get on there. There are a handful of guys that really get Dover. There are a handful of guys that really get Darlington, and they come to the fore. And I think this is one of those tracks where you can't go too deep into the field because not too much crazy crap is going to happen. I mean, unless you've got some kind of wild wreck at the front of the field early on that just destroys a whole bunch of cars like we would see at a restrictor plate track or something like that, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to see the guys that know how to race at this track, like a Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex, perhaps a Kevin Harvick. Kyle Larson's been extremely fast. I think those guys run away with it again because once you get into that rhythm, that it's so short that and such a fast lap that no strategy is going to get you any kind of gain on there. You're going to be stuck in traffic all day. You've just got to be confident in getting your car through the corners, and it's tough to pick a long shot here. This is 2 weeks in a row, and maybe next week with Coda we get that chance, but 2 weeks in a row here with these types of unique ovals, I just think you got to kind of go with those top five kind of guys. And I honestly had Truex in there, and I tried to figure out a way to work it monetarily, but I at 3-1, I just could not make it with the other guys in there. So
that was the thing with when I was looking at it too. As much as we can see why Truex is 3-1 and why Larson is 4-1, especially Truex at 3-1. We haven't seen a favorite like that for, I don't even know,
all season.
Maybe. And because of that, that's the reason I just couldn't go there yet. Is we know that Truex can dominate again this week, but taking both drivers, which Eric did, and Eric is kind of playing the safe game again, which I was surprised at because he's now in the negative again. After you were the only one that hit Truex last week. So but Eric has gone the safe way with 4 drivers and just kind of making his money back unless Hamlin wins, and then he probably can clear $50 or something like that. But I just couldn't. I mean, to take both of them, I just can't go down that road. Larson does make the most sense because of the fact you're getting a little bit more money, bang for your buck, and Larson didn't win last week. He hasn't won in a while. And when you take a look at the stats, Larson has been 12th or better in 11 of 12, 6 top fives and a win at Dover. And that win came in his last visit in 2019 when he led 154 laps. This is clearly a good surface for Larson. You just get the feeling that with Truex already with the 3 wins and the win last week, that Larson's kind of overdue between the two of them.
Between the two of them, yeah, I would say between almost the entire field, other than Denny Hamlin, Larson's probably the most overdue. Because every single week, it does not matter what track we are on, that guy is fast. And I was excited to see what he was going to be capable of at Darlington, because that had been historically a good track for him. And it was the first time going there in Hendrick equipment. And the same is true here at Dover, and probably even more so. Looking back on his stats, he only has 4. He's been there 12 times. He only has 4 times that he's raced there that he has a finish in the double digits, and 3 of them were 12th, 11th, and 10th.
Yeah.
There was one time he finished 25th. Every other time besides that, it was 9th or better, and he's led 617 laps at the track in 12 starts. So put him in a Hendrick car, which this year we know is on point, and they are extremely strong. The only one that hasn't won on that team yet being the defending champion, Chase Elliott. We're all still scratching our heads on that. And it's the recipe for domination on Larson's side this week. And when I saw Eric's picks, I was trying to figure out, because I had already done mine. I opened his and looked at it. I'm like, how did you get the math to work to be able to get everybody in there? Like, who are you going negative on? Like, who are you just, if they win, who are you not getting any kind of return on? And somehow he got it to work. But I could not with my math. And the back-to-back wins, plus the fact that Larson, to me, has been more consistent than Truex in terms of speed every single week, is the one that gave me the nod. So going with Larson there. Either one is a good pick, but Larson just has a little bit more going for him, like the odds, plus the consistency for me.
Yeah, Truex, 8 top fives in his last 9 races at Dover with 2 wins and 3 straight runner-ups. Now, fantasy wise, okay, but still, we're trying to win a race here. And if you look at it, keep this in mind. In 3 of his last 6 races at Dover, including last August, Truex has not led a lap. So we're trying to pick a winner. We're nitpicking, but we're talking about a 3-1 pick who hasn't led a lap in 3 of his last 6 races there. So I
Yeah.
know he's been real good. He's clearly should be the favorite, but it's possible that he finishes second or third behind Larson and doesn't lead a lap. It's possible.
Yeah. Plus, for me, he's starting on pole. It's kind of tough when
he'll lead a lap.
He'll lead a lap for sure. So that's good from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah.
And he'll lead some laps and he'll lead a lot of laps.
Yeah.
You got Denny Hamlin, the other guy who has yet to win this year, who should. Kyle Larson, who's probably got just as much frustration now as Hamlin, even though he's got to win just because he's been so good so many weeks, starting fourth right behind you. It's going to be a very tall order. It's going to be a very interesting first stage, and we'll see how that plays out, see who's really got the car.
Who starts? Who's second?
Denny Hamlin.
All right, so
worked his way up to a front row starting spot after dropping back due to his Talladega woes and a couple of bad races. He worked his way all the way back to a top row or front row starting spot.
According to Eric's trends, the second position has won 4 of the last 7 races at Dover, 2 of the last 3. A pole sitter has not won at Dover since 2011. You got that, Martin Truex Jr.
That's my point.
Now, Ford has only 2 wins in the last 19. So,
yeah, me too.
Yeah. And I think, again, I believe, just looking at it, I don't think. Did anybody take a Ford? No. Nobody took a Ford.
Probably not. Unless somebody took Harvick, that would be the only logical.
Okay, yes, Harvick. I keep forgetting Harvick's on a Ford. That's it. Harvick. And look, if anybody could break it, it's Harvick. And again, like I said, we all have Harvick for a good reason. He's dialed in now for the best little mini stretch of his season. Second, fourth, and sixth. We mentioned he's very good at Bristol. 9 top 10s in his last 12 races at Dover. 7 top 5s. A runner-up and 3 wins. He won 1 of the 2 races last year. He was 4th in the other race. When he led last year, he led 223 laps. He has led 200 laps or more in 5 races at Dover, including 355 in his 2015 win. So he knows how to win and dominate at Dover, which is why we all went with Harvick, the only Ford that we decided to go on in our short little lists. Because usually we have these big lists, but not this week. You guys went with Hamlin. He was over 28 until his win last August when he led 115 laps. Then he came back and finished 19th. So I'm still a little bit concerned with Hamlin myself, which is why I decided not to take him. It's just 1 win over his last 29 now, I guess, at Dover. And I'm still, I don't know. I'm still kind of, he's not back yet. He's still had a little bit of a tiny mini slump. He's not back yet. Maybe he returns in full form on Sunday. But considering I'm looking for better options odds-wise, and I think we'll get to those in a little bit, I just decided to pass on Hamlin this week. But you guys both took him.
Yeah, Hamlin, to me, you're right. He's not back. He's getting his footing back. Like I said, he's worked his way back to a front row starting spot. I think that'll make a difference for him. He had the terrible luck at Talladega and then backed it up with the 12th at Kansas, completely ruining his streak. But he returned to the top 5 in Darlington, and with somebody who's been similar to Larson, somebody who's been so fast so long this season, pretty much every week, aside from those couple of hiccups, he could very well come out and be dominant again right like the flip of a light switch. I don't disagree with you for being cautious because you're right. He's not back. If he starts finishing second and third week to week again, then we know he's back, and he'll get to that point at some point. But I do think that Hamlin at a track like Dover, it's a place for him where he could immediately flip the switch and be on.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, if I didn't go with Harvick, I'd probably go with Hamlin. That's probably the switch off. But it was more like, okay, Harvick, we just talked about his history at this track, which is actually better than Hamlin's. He's in a better little run than Hamlin is. His odds are a little bit better. If there's a time to go with Harvick over Hamlin, I think it's this week. But yeah, Hamlin's odds of 6-1 are not bad. As a matter of fact, they're double Truex.
Yeah, and looking at Harvick, you're right. He's got the more recent. If you look at the last 5 races, he's got the more recent momentum, and it's all been in one direction. Hamlin's kind of gone up and down, and he's starting to come back. Harvick's been a gradual ascension upward as those races have gone on, definitely from the beginning of the season, but even from the last 5 races. So giving him the 5th starting spot, it's going to be tough, obviously, with Larson, Hamlin, and Truex all up there in the top 5. But I think Harvick stands a very good chance this week, especially considering how good he's been historically at Dover.
And the other driver at 8-1 that I did go all in on was Kyle Busch. So I decided to put half of my money on Kyle Busch. And look, he was impressive last week, finishing 3rd, because he had the tire issue and still was there. Look, Truex dominated. But if Truex, if he wasn't there, he didn't dominate, then Kyle Busch would have had a chance to win that race last week, even though he had the early issue. But Kyle has been very good at this racetrack. He's very good. He has 8 wins at Bristol. He's got 3 wins at Dover. The only thing I was concerned with Kyle at Dover is he's only, out of the 1,213 career laps he's led at Dover, he only has 4 laps led in his last 4 races. So, but after these last 2 weeks, I mean, he looks like he might be back. And if he is back, and it's like all of a sudden Kyle's Kyle, then I feel like I'm getting a bargain of bargains at 8-1.
If Kyle is Kyle again this week, then yeah, you nailed it. And that train will have left the station for all of us who haven't on it by next week. So he'll be 3-1 next week if Kyle. But you said exactly why I did not choose him. He's got his win this year. I think he's, without a doubt, he is in a different spot now than where he was last season. I think he's coming back. But Dover, for me, is just, I'm a little concerned at the track recently, not historically, just recently. 10th, 6th, 3rd, and 11th in the last 4 races with only 4 laps led. Those aren't typical Kyle Busch numbers, and that's the only reason I was hesitant.
You were the only one who went Chase Elliott, and Elliott's 8-1, solid number. 7 top 5s in a win in 10 races. This is a good track for Elliott. He's had an engine issue and a wreck in 2 of his last 3 races. So that's been an issue, but usually when he doesn't have issues like that, he performs well. And overall, even dating back to his time in the Xfinity Series, he's had good results at this racetrack. But and it's interesting because he's been in the last 7 races. He has like 5 top 10s, got some top 5s, has a 1 runner up. It just doesn't even feel like it. It's like because he's not leading laps.
Yeah, he's been under the radar. 7th, 5th, and 2nd are his 3 best finishes in the last 5 races heading into this weekend. But for me, again, similar to as I looked at Kyle Busch, I looked at the recent Dover races for Elliott. There were 2 times he started from pole. You mentioned the engine failure and the crash. Those are the only 2 times out of the last 4 that he didn't lead laps. The times that he did lead laps, it was 145 laps led with a 5th place finish in 2019. And then last year was 27 laps led in this race with another 5th place finish. So uh, Elliott has been quiet without a doubt, but he's been quietly successful recently. So he just feels like to me the kind of guy that will come out and win after being quiet, and everybody will be like pretend like he wasn't quiet. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, it's Chase Elliott. We all should have expected this, but really, you're right. It's been extremely quiet. He's been extremely under the radar. So I kind of feel like that win is going to come as a surprise to people who really pay attention. So I think that could come this week at a track where he's been very successful over 2 out of the last 4. Take away those DNFs, and who knows, they might have been wins.
Then we have a jump to the. Again, we actually might as well talk about all 3 Penske drivers. Kozlowski's 13-1, Logano's 16-1, and then Ryan Blaney is 22-1. I don't remember the last time Ryan Blaney was 22-1, and so much so that I almost took him this week just to throw a few bucks on him, because it's like, come on. I mean, 22-1 is ridiculous, especially when you take a look at the fact that he does have a couple of top 10s there. He led 37 laps in the last race there. And in 4 Xfinity Series races, first, second, fourth, and fourth. So he can race on this racetrack. And I'm getting 22-1. And he's 11th or better in 8 of his last 9 races this year. But then it's the history, of course, including Kozlowski and Logano. Kozlowski, no top 5s in his last 8, just 1 win out of 22. Logano, no wins out of 24, and he's led only 41 laps in 24 races. So this is not the week to take Penske.
Absolutely not. Out of the 3, though, if you're going to choose a Penske guy, Ryan Blaney is the one to go with for exactly as you said. He led 37 laps there last fall, started 7th, finished 12th. He's got a couple of top 10s there. Keselowski is the one that you absolutely avoid at all costs. I'm not exactly sure what the heck happened last week, but he dropped like a rock almost instantaneously. Like the second he got knocked out of the lead, he was like back in 20th, fighting to hang into the top 20 for the rest of the day. So he obviously has problems that he's working through. And then Logano, just throughout history, he's got a long history at this track in all his starts, 24 total. 14 top 10, so not terrible, but again, his highest finish was a 3rd, and he's done that a couple of times, and only in 24 starts at the track has he led 41 total laps. That's really disappointing. So he's one of the ones that can compete at this track for a top 10, and if all things go right, it's going to be a top 5. It would be a big shock for me to see Logano win. So for those reasons, Blaney is a guy for me on the Penske roster if you're going to go with any of them.
Okay. And by the way, I think you and I also put more money on Blaney in our futures, because
I did.
He was still, what, 9-1? Was he?
Yeah, I was pretty shocked at that, to be honest with you, still, considering how deep we are into the season. He's got to win. He's been consistent.
He's 5th in the point standings.
Yeah. I know he's not had the problems that affected him last year, so he's only going to get better as the year goes on. So people better wake up to that quickly.
Yeah, it's almost like, and this is what happens when you start maturing. It's like you can notice he's having in race issues, but he's finishing, and he's still finishing 10th, 11th, 9th. That's what championship drivers need to do. That's when you grow up, when you don't have the right car, or you're not at the right racetrack, and you still have a decent enough finish.
Yes, exactly right.
Byron, you and I both went with Byron this week. And I just keep putting money on. I've been just loading up on Byron futures lately, because
I've been a little hesitant on him in the futures, but I have a feeling the time's going to come where I need to catch up.
Yeah. And
he's very good in the playoffs.
He's 60, and the odds are like the same every week for him. He's 16-1 again. Look, he just doesn't have enough racing behind him at these tracks, which I think is a benefit if you take him. He's had a couple of top 10s, a top 5. He's had a couple of good races in Xfinity Series here. 10 straight top 10s. 3rd in the point standings. Yes, why not at 16-1?
Yeah, Byron's got everything going right for him this season. I think if he were any other driver, had some different name at this point,
absolutely,
he'd be significantly higher.
Imagine if that was list. Jeff Gordon.
What was that?
Imagine if it was Jeff Gordon.
Oh God. If this was Jeff Gordon's performance, he'd be 3-1. He'd
Yeah.
be tied for the favorite up there with Truex. But yeah, I think for whatever reason, Byron just gets consistently overlooked, and this is not the season to be overlooking him because he's been on a tear. This is a hugely successful season for any driver, let alone somebody like William Byron. Maybe it's just because he doesn't have so many wins under his belt, but I mean, starting on the second row this week at Dover, he finished fourth in the fall race here last year. He's got one other top 10. He's avoided trouble at this track, and this track is very easy to fall into trouble. I think this is another good week where capitalize on those odds, and I have a feeling very shortly I'm going to be playing catch up on him on the futures too.
And you were the only one to go with Bowman, as I mentioned before, 20-1, 3 top 5s in his last 4 races at Dover, including a runner-up. He's got a couple of top 5s in Xfinity racing, and that actually happened at his last 2 races at Dover in the Xfinity Series. And even though he doesn't have a top 15 in 5 of his last 6 races on the season, the other was a win. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with Bowman right now. They are fortunate he's got a win because it's just something off, and I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about Bowman the way we were thinking about Blaney last year. Maybe he's a year off. He's got to win, but just too many negative results, as we just mentioned with Blaney. But when he has negative results, he's not finishing well. It's just they're bad,
yeah.
And it's just experience, and maybe we are accounting. Maybe we're just thinking too highly of him too soon. But we know he's an up-and-coming driver. I just don't know if this is the year for him.
I don't know that this is the year for him for sure. He's definitely not shown the consistency that you're going to need to get through the playoffs and ultimately become a champion this season. I think to me, this year has been a year where the results have compounded. So the disappointments of a tough start to the season and bad results, they've fed into more bad results. To me, you can have a bad result one week, like Denny Hamlin. He had 2 technically bad results in a week, but he came back and he's finished in the top 5 again. Bowman seems to get in these slumps that he's finding very difficult to claw his way out of. The reason I went with him this week is because 3 out of the last 4 races at Dover, he was top 5, second, third, and fifth. Didn't lead many laps. He led 16 in the second place finish. But if there's a spot where he's gonna have that inconsistent high, it's going to be a spot like Dover where he's got the confidence of having 3 out of the last 5 be top 5 finishes for him. Plus he's shown that he can win. So for him, he was more of an afterthought. Oh, I got to try to figure out a way to get him in. So that's why I went with him. But certainly of the bunch, Larson and Byron are the 2 you're going to go with.
Yeah, I would. Again, if I was going to go with another long shot, I would have went with Blaney. But this is, and the other one I went with was Byron. It's, again, like we talked about before, it's just this isn't a week to go with long shots, which is why our long shots this week are guys like Bowman and Byron and maybe even Blaney. Those are the long shots to keep an eye on. Not, I don't even know who else we would even consider. Well, we've gone with the Dillons or the Kurt Busches or even the Bushers and guys like that, but it's just thinking about those drivers winning this week. I just don't see how that could happen.
Yeah, Dover, like I said at the very beginning, it's really tough. You can't rely on strategy to get you here. It's got to be some kind of unpredictable event like a crash or whatever. Even with the late restarts, it's a tough track to pass on. Track position is going to be king. And so if you're not in position for the last 20 or so laps in the top 1 or 2, maybe even top 4, if you're stretching it, you're just not going to get it unless there's some kind of wild, unpredictable crash that happens. So I just don't see people being able to make up ground on strategy. I don't see people trying to, coming to the fore where they weren't quick already through pit stops and differing pit strategy, trying to gain track position. I just think they're going to get swallowed alive. So you're really looking you're really looking probably in the top 10, top 12 in terms of where people are starting for where you're going to get somebody that's going to come out and win. And, it's very selective track in terms of its wins. So
As far as the starting lineup, are there any competitors in this race that they just happen to be behind the eight ball as far as starting position?
The only one I would say might be in that position, well, maybe two. Christopher Bell, maybe a little bit. I think he's very good. He's another one that could get the rhythm right and come out and surprise, but he's not got a bad starting spot. He's 11th. The only one that really kind of jumps out to me, and he's not somebody that's likely going to win anyway, is going to be Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting back in 20th. Oh. I think if he were in the top 15, he might be a little bit more reliable in terms of somebody you might want to think about going for, but starting 20th, it's a little bit too far back for me right now.
Yeah, because Bell has 2 wins in Xfinity Series. Dylan has had some pretty decent moments, and he's had a good record in the Xfinity Series at 50-1. Reddick hasn't shown much here so far, and he's been hot, so
right.
Maybe this is a week to take off, even though he's 60-1. Almirola has a pretty decent record here, but come on.
No way.
He can't even finish races on normal tracks.
There is no way you can choose Almirola this week, let alone any week. He is having a train wreck of a season. And that crash last week at Darlington, you couldn't tell who it was the way that the coverage was going when it happened. But then the second you knew it was Almirola, it was like, oh, yeah, of course it is. There's no one else it possibly could be. That's exactly how his season is going. And I would be shocked if he walked away with a top 10 this week.
Now, we're getting close to drivers having to get their deals for next year. So, if this continues, he can't be back. I know we've talked about sponsors and all that, but come on. Really? He can't have a season like this and be back.
Yeah, I would be shocked if he gets retained. At this point, even now, he has to win to get into the playoffs. I don't think there's a situation where he could, or a scenario where he could point his way in. I think he has to win. So that means a significant change in the performances and how his team is operating right now. And he's got a very short time to do it. What I would like to see happen is you got a Ford driver out there who is doing better and has shown himself capable to be able to get good results when the chips are down. And that is our good friend, Matty D, and he's out of a ride next year. He's in a Ford.
There you go.
He's doing better than Almirola. Put him in the seat. Put him through us and see what he can do. And plus, you get that extra support of a veteran being able to help somebody like Kevin Harvick as well, bring on the new guys.
Chris Buescher, again, if this was a different week, it's interesting. He was 11th or better in 4 Xfinity Series races with 2 top 5s and a win, and he's 9th and 8th in his last 2 races on the season. And even though he was 16th and 14th last year here, those were his best 2 finishes. So fantasy-wise, this is probably a good week. Maybe he finishes in the top 10 again.
Yeah, I think Roush Fenway, particularly Buescher, has been very good and very consistent for fantasy rosters for sure. I picked both of them in my fantasy predictions last week, and both of them did exceptionally well for anybody that listened to me. And I think Ryan Newman, he's obviously got experience at Dover as well. Yeah. Chris Buescher, like you said, Roush Fenway's definitely taken a step forward. They're not where they used to be. They're definitely a team now that you can't overlook that has speed at certain tracks. I think Dover is one of those certain tracks that you can look at. Probably more so Chris Buescher for me right now. He just seems to be driving a little bit better than Ryan Newman. But definitely from a fantasy perspective, I think Buescher's got to be a consideration this week, and possibly even Newman as well.
Well, remember, we talked about it last year with Buescher, that this is a driver with a pretty good history, and he's just been forgotten. He's not on a big team. And all of a sudden this year, and that's why I threw him on my team as my last pick, I think. Well, let's give it a shot. He was one of my last picks, and he has been fantastic. He's 13th in points. So,
yeah.
And he's, you get the feeling that maybe Newman or Buescher, one of the two, might surprise with a win this year.
I would not bet against it. I was just thinking, or I have been thinking the same thing, and have been thinking that way since they performed so well in Homestead. I mean, they were rapidly fast in that race, and then they come out in Atlanta and they actually showed speed throughout the stages as well. Another rough surface track, which is why you definitely had to choose them for Darlington. And anybody who did definitely lucked out, is not lucked out, but definitely made the right decision because they were fast there as well. So if they can use those strengths that they've shown on those few tracks, definitely Dover, they can do it again. But if you see them have success at a place like Dover, I think the omen is good for the rest of the season. They might start getting faster on all these other 1.5 mile ovals that don't have rough surfaces, where they're still a little bit behind. And even still, when you go to the tracks like super speedways, Talladega, Daytona, short tracks, Martinsville, Richmond, Bristol, you got to keep these guys in mind too, because that's when the machinery is equalized, and that's when they're able to compete on a little bit more equal footing with the rest of the guys. So definitely watch these two very closely this week. I think if they do well, if we see another top 10 out of Buescher, if we see a top 15-ish out of Newman, both of them consistently, I think you can look to them more frequently on some of the more consistent tracks or more ubiquitous tracks that we have on the calendar.
And then fantasy-wise also, Suarez 125-1, 5 top 10s in 6 Xfinity Series races at the track, with 2 top 5s and a win. He has 4 top 10s in 8 races at Dover. Briscoe at 150-1, your fantasy driver, has 4 top 10s in 5 Xfinity Series races, 3 top 5s, and a win. And he's finished 11th in 2 of his last 3 races, which is almost like saying he's been 2 top 10s in his last 3. So
exactly,
those are a couple other guys to keep an eye on for fantasy. Maybe they could also squeak into a top 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Suarez, I mean, 16th at Richmond, 11th at Kansas, 11th at Kansas is just a remarkable performance. Brand new team. I've been very impressed with how they came together. He's being able to, or showing that he's able to get the most out of it. So, yeah, those two guys from a fantasy perspective, when you're looking further on down the rosters, those are the guys that you're going to want to go with now, because they've both got, well, Suarez has momentum behind him. Briscoe maybe a little bit more shaky in terms of consistency, but Suarez definitely has some things to point to and build on, which is very encouraging from a fantasy perspective. But both great records at this track.
All right, CJ. So definitely by next week, because we're still working on a few things production-wise, we're going to tap in at some point and take a look at a little bit behind the wall, hopefully as early as next week, of what it's like to be a member of RotoWire NASCAR coverage. So we're working on that. We'll get that to our audience real soon. In the meanwhile, tell me a little bit about what you got working on for this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend we've got the Xfinity and NASCAR Cup previews for Dover. I almost said Daytona. For Dover coming up. Yeah, we've got a Xfinity race on Saturday, Cup race on Sunday, so we'll have fantasy previews up for those probably Friday. And then we'll have the NASCAR Barometer recap of the race from Sunday up on rotowire.com this Monday.
And then we've got what? What's next week? Next week is the road course?
Circuit of the Americas, first time out at COTA down in Austin, Texas. Should be very, very interesting.
So we've got 2 road courses the next 4 races. Well, the next 5?
We got Circuit of the Americas
Nashville?
Next week. We've got Sonoma. Nashville's a smaller oval.
Okay. So 2 of the next 4, and then Nashville.
But it's now 1.5. Yeah.
And that's so bottom line is that 3 of the next 5 races, or let's just say when we get past Dover, 3 of the next 4 races are going to be pretty wide open, crazy. Like who knows what's going to happen? Yep. Unless, of course, since it's a road course, Chase Elliott just dominates a couple of these races, which is possible, or maybe even more in Truex. But Coke 600's also in there.
Yeah, exactly
So
right.
that's good. That's coming up
Yep.
in 2 weeks.
Very.
And uh, and then the other thing that I wanted to point out just quickly, did you hear this? I was on Twitter. There was this thing going on with Nashville with the people that live in the community in the neighborhood. They're like apparently really upset about the track, and I don't know whether or
No.
not it's because they're talking about redoing the track. Maybe there's going to be some more construction, and which is going to bring in more racing. And so there are some community members there that are freaking out. Again, it's a minority because most of the community wants the track there. But you have these people. I just saw it on Twitter. I was like, oh, what's this thing about Nashville or something? And I think it said Speedway, and I clicked it, and that's what I saw. I saw these people complaining about, their the noise that emanates from the track, and it's weird. I just found it interesting that this was I was like, why are they talking about this now? It's not like you would have figured
Yeah.
the week of the race would have been time to talk about this, but that's something that's we'll probably talk about the week of the race. So
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I hadn't heard there's always minorities of people in racetrack communities that complain about the noise, but the economy, the fun, I think the vast majority of people appreciate it. I mean, look at Indy, the entire, the whole city comes to
oh
life for an
yeah,
entire month, and all these big races do that. So if you've got a good draw like a track like Nashville does, and you're getting NASCAR coming in, you probably got people that want to be a little bit quieter, like, oh, I want to go have my family barbecue or whatever without having to battle traffic. But just suck it up. You look at how much money and attention you're
absolutely.
getting. So they need to get over it. But I hadn't heard that. I'll look it up and see what they're complaining about.
And I don't know. It just are there two tracks in Nashville or just one?
Uh,
Because it looked like a really small community racetrack. I'm like, is that the racetrack that they're going to be racing NASCAR? Or maybe that's a
it,
completely different racetrack. So I don't know. I just didn't, myself, I only skimmed through it. So I didn't know if you knew anything about it. So
no,
it's
all news to me.
okay. Well, we'll find out more about that, and then we'll talk about it obviously in the coming weeks, and we'll be in Nashville soon enough. All right, CJ, appreciate it as always, and Eric will join me on Monday to recap the race, and also there's an IndyCar race. Where is that? Do you know?
Yes, IndyCar. Why am I not
The Grand
remembering?
Prix or something?
Yes, it's Indianapolis, the
Oh,
Grand Prix,
okay.
the road course before they hit the oval for the 500.
So that
How could I forget?
okay.
GMS Prix, I think, is what it's called.
So what is it? So they have that race. Then what? Then they take a week off.
They qualify the
Qualify that
following,
week.
yep,
And then it's the
and then
500. Okay.
on the
And
30th.
Eric's
Yep.
going to be there all week. That's his hometown, basically. So we'll have a lot of 500 coverage here on Prime Sports, NASCAR, and of course, obviously here on our YouTube channel. CJ, appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.